Hello, RSU 13 school community. My name is Stephanie Tribo. I'm the Director of Curriculum, Assessment, and Instruction for RSU 13, and I'm sharing this document on behalf of our administrative team. And also on behalf of some of the committees that have been doing a tremendous amount of work this summer, which is inclusive of our educator staff as well as our Seacoast Educator Association. The document itself is not our specific reopening plan. It is inclusive of our plans in developing a series of guidelines and recommendations that we will be using flexibly in order to respond to whatever type of reopening we will ultimately need to be doing. It's a plan that will provide employees and families, as well as our administrators, with a clear document inclusive of guidelines that can be used whether we're doing remote online learning, whether we're back with a series of heavy restrictions, or whether we're back to full in-person learning. The idea is that this guide will be available to families online. It will be available in print version. We'll be able to use the guide so that we can fluidly move from one type of learning to the other. If, for example, we're able to open fully in the fall, but we need to transition to either a much more restrictive environment or to an online environment, then we'll have documentation of clear expectations already in place. We certainly note that one of the downfalls of moving to emergency learning in the spring was that teachers did a tremendous job of moving their instruction to online education, but we as a district lacked a level of consistency. We lacked a level of clear expectations, primarily because it was indeed emergency learning. And now that we have an opportunity to really prepare for that, we want to make sure that our expectations are really clear. We've asked educators to provide feedback and weigh in on these plans, and we continue to involve our educators in developing these recommendations. We're focused on our top two priorities, which those of you that were able to join us in the fall when we shared our strategic planning efforts with the different communities around the district, we shared these, so you've heard them before. They're to provide social and emotional support to all students, specifically building connections with students and fostering students' connections with each other, as well as to provide sound academic instruction through proficiency-based education. And what you probably heard us say during those presentations were that we put those two things on par. We call them SEL, social emotional learning, and proficiency-based education. And while we do continue to put those two things on par, we've listed the first one because we're really trying to elevate those relationships and supports for students. We recognize that they're going to need additional levels of supports when they re-enter school, whatever that school might look like. And we also really tried to elevate that during emergency learning in order to try to sustain those relationships with students. And again, ensure that they're supported as best as we could provide. The additional priorities given the COVID-19 situation are to ensure the health and safety of students, staff, and our community. We also want to ensure that we have a system in place to respond to an anticipated increase in any potential mental health increase for students, such as a result of students feeling isolated, a result of students who maybe have an increase in depression, increase in anxiety. We also want to ensure that we have equity for our students. We have an overview here that we're providing. I'm not going to read down through the whole thing, but I will highlight a couple of key pieces of this. Again, this is our effort to be as transparent as possible. This document is intended to be a fluid document. It may change over time. The link will be readily available, so you have access to it. You can check it. The timelines may shift and may change. We are hoping, and our ultimate goal is to get all students back into buildings at the start of the school year. Our planning process is intended to develop ways to meet that goal, but we also recognize and are working on planning and preparing for alternative scenarios as well. It's really important that we have a guide that we're able to use so that we can fluidly move from one scenario to another. For example, if we're able to start in person, but we need to quickly move to online learning due to an outbreak or a severe increase in community spread, we need to be able to have a document that's fluid enough to allow us to do that, and that still continues to outline clear expectations for families, our educators, and our community. So that is what we are preparing. You'll see that we have some committees that are spending lots of time this summer working on these recommendations that will be included in this guide. As we continue down through this document, the second page provides a flow chart. We started this work as early as we possibly could after several administrative team meetings where we were brainstorming what we really need to prioritize in terms of decision making and what we do have control over. We jumped right into establishing some committees so that we could come up with some recommendations. Even not knowing what Maine's recommendations were at that time, and Maine Department of Education does have a framework for reopening, but as they've stated, there will probably be multiple iterations of that, and the final one will not be released until August. So in the meantime, RSU 13 is not waiting around. RSU 13 is developing this guide so that, again, regardless of our scenario, we will be prepared. We use some of our educator input survey data to establish some of these committee recommendations. We're also using, we looked through our parent survey data from the survey that we put out at the end of May, and we asked all educators at the very end of the school year, when we had some workshop time with them, to provide some additional recommendations and input. Which they did, and has been incredibly helpful for our committees as they've been doing their work. So you can see here the process that we'll be using as we work through these recommendations. You'll see that we're already starting next week going to be vetting some of the recommendations from the committees who have already completed their committee work. So we're trying to expedite that process as quickly as possible. This page 3 here outlines all of our committees, the tasks of those committees, as well as our committee chairs, and additional members of the committee include our members of our educator staff who are volunteering their time in order to do this difficult work, and members of our Seacoast Education Association. So we are so grateful for the work that they're doing and how quickly they are completing this work so that we can continue to move it forward. I won't take the time to read through all of those. They are available for you to take a look at. And the next part of the process is really the bigger overarching part that I know everybody wants answers on right now. But this is the larger process of, more specifically, how we start the school year. And again, we don't have that answer for you at this point. We don't want to wait for the Maine Department of Education to unveil another framework in August and then start this work, which is why we're starting our district work where we can have a level of local control and make some decisions around our guidelines that we want to include. And then once we get a recommendation of how we should begin the school year within our region, we can just jump to that section in our guidelines and ensure that we have the logistics in place. So this really just outlines that process. And you'll notice here it says a district survey for families and employees. That's what we're asking all of you to do. We are sending one out to all of our employees. We're sending one out to all of our families. It's going to help us to establish what your thoughts are, some of the things that you feel comfortable with, some of your abilities that you might have in terms of transportation. There are some questions there around technology and food service. So some of this input will help us as we get further along in our decision-making process. So you can see here that ultimately, when decisions about how we reopen are made, we will be receiving input from the Maine Department of Education, the CDC, and local health experts who will help us to make that final decision. And again, this is sort of the timeline for that. And the final piece of this is really just in case you're interested in our process here is the central office team, the responsibilities of that team and the composition of that team, our administrative team as well as the composition of that team, our decision-making process and who is responsible for certain decisions. And certainly we honor our input of our families and are interested in your thoughts and some of the things that you're thinking about for your family right now. So we have our family survey regarding our reopening. And I'll just read this beginning here. We urge you to share your thoughts with us through this Return to School 2020 survey. We recognize that families are in various situations and also that our families will have different comfort levels depending on what decisions are made about the return to school. We want to make clear that one of our top priorities in decision making is to ensure the health and safety of our students, staff, and community. We also want to be clear that given our current level of resources and the state of the economy and its forecast, we know we will need to make decisions that are feasible and practical. We want to hear from you about your preferences and concerns as we head into the 2020-2021 school year. Please take a moment to fill out and share your thoughts by July 13th, 2020. The survey is anonymous and should take about 10 minutes to complete. There is space here at the very end where families can let us know any additional thoughts or concerns that you have. So we would really appreciate you taking the time to fill out the survey. We will be surveying our employees as well and compiling our results to help us in our decision-making process. So many thanks for all of your patience, for your support. We want you to know that RSU 13 is here for you.